Tonight, calm stories over rainy Minecraft, and everyone comes from the world of work. Am I overreacting? You decide. First up, a coworker who seems to time everyone's breaks in a little notebook. There's a reason, and it isn't the one anybody feared. Get comfortable, here we go. There was a woman at my old job named Carol, and Carol had a notebook, a small one, spiral bound, that she carried everywhere. And slowly, over a few weeks, we all realized what was in it. Times. Whenever someone got up for a break, Carol wrote it down. When they came back, she wrote that down too. The whole floor got quietly nervous. It built the way these things do. The first week, we thought we imagined it. The second week, someone caught a clear look at a page, and it was all there, in neat little rows, names, times out, times back. My coworker Devon started taking his breaks in the stairwell, out of sight. I started wondering if Carol was some kind of spy for management. By the third week, half the floor thought we were being watched, and we sort of hated her for it. So one afternoon I did the brave thing, which is to say I asked her about it directly. I said, "Carol, what's the notebook for?" And she closed it, and she looked at me for a second, and then she told me a new manager had started that spring. And that manager had begun quietly building what he called cases, logging people, timing them, looking for reasons to let the expensive, older staff go. Carol had seen it happen at another company, so she started her own log. Every break, honest and short, written down. Proof, in her handwriting, that every single person on that floor was doing their job just fine. When the manager finally made his move and claimed people were slacking, Carol had a notebook that said otherwise. Names, times, weeks of it. Nobody got fired. The manager did eventually. So, were we overreacting, resenting Carol's little notebook completely? It wasn't a weapon pointed at us. It was a shield she was holding over the whole floor, and none of us knew. I bought her a new notebook when the old one filled up. Leather cover, she still uses it. That story ends there. One spiral notebook, one manager who went hunting, and a woman quietly guarding a floor full of people who thought she was the threat. Best coworker I ever had. Speaking of a coworker everyone misjudged, our next story is about the war of passive-aggressive notes on the office refrigerator. Every office has a fridge, and every fridge has notes. But at my old job, the notes got out of hand. It started small. Please don't take what isn't yours. Then a bigger one, in red. Food is going missing. This is theft. Taped to the door where everyone could see. The whole break room got tense about it. The notes escalated week by week. The first was polite. The second named a shelf. The third threatened to involve HR. People started side-eyeing each other over lunch. Everybody assumed the note writer was just an uptight person making a huge deal out of a missing yogurt. I assumed it too. I thought, it's a granola bar, let it go. So I paid closer attention, mostly out of nosiness, and I noticed the notes were always about one specific shelf, the bottom one. Always the same lunch bag. So I finally asked the woman who packed it quietly if she was the one writing the notes. And she told me the bag was her coworker Sam's. Sam had diabetes. In that bag were the snacks and the careful, measured lunch that kept his blood sugar from crashing at his desk. And someone kept taking them, not knowing probably, just grabbing food. But for Sam, it wasn't a snack, it was medical. A crash at work could put him on the floor. She couldn't say that on a note without telling the whole office Sam's business. So the note stayed vague and angry, and everyone thought she was being dramatic about a granola bar. She was actually standing guard over a man's health. So, was the note writer overreacting? No, we were, for rolling our eyes. Once a few of us knew, quietly, the food stopped going missing. Sam never found out how close the whole office came to knowing. His lunch has been safe for years. That story ends there. One angry red note, one measured lunch on the bottom shelf, and a coworker guarding a secret that wasn't hers to tell. Leave the bottom shelf alone. Speaking of a coworker who wrote everything down, our next story is about the woman who takes notes on every single word said in a meeting. At my job, there's a woman named Priya, and Priya is the meeting scribe. Not officially, nobody asked her to. But in every meeting, she quietly writes down what gets said and who said it and what got decided. For a while, it struck the rest of us as a lot. It's a status meeting, we think. Nobody needs a transcript of it. It became a running thing. The first few meetings, people barely noticed. Then someone made a joke about it. Priya's writing a novel. Then a manager once said in a meeting, "There's no need to write all this down," and Priya just smiled and kept writing. I'll admit, I found it a little much myself. It felt like being recorded. So one day, over coffee, I asked her why she does it. And Priya told me that at a job years before, a decision got made in a meeting, verbally, and then went wrong. And when it went wrong, everyone in the room suddenly remembered it differently. Suddenly, it was one quiet person's fault, a woman who'd said almost nothing, who had no way to prove what was actually agreed. She got walked out the door over a decision she never made. Priya was in that room, she couldn't prove it either. She swore that day that she would never again sit in a meeting where the truth had no witness. So now she writes it all down, every word. Not to trap anyone, but so that nobody can ever be quietly rewritten into the villain of a meeting they sat through honestly. So, was the office overreacting, teasing Priya about her notes? A bit. Her notebook has quietly settled 3 arguments I know of, and protected at least one person who'd have been blamed for nothing. Write it all down, Priya. That story ends there. One meeting scribe, one honest woman walked out a door years ago, and a notebook that makes sure the truth always has a witness. Priya's notes are the fairest thing in the building. Speaking of a sound at work that drove me quietly insane, our next story is about the loudest keyboard I have ever heard. I sat near a man named Gary, and Gary had a mechanical keyboard. If you know, you know. Every keystroke was a loud, satisfying, to him, maddening to me clack, all day, clack, clack, clack. In a quiet office, it was like sitting next to someone tap dancing on a typewriter for 8 hours. For a while, it genuinely frayed my nerves. It wore on me slowly. The first week I thought I'd get used to it. I did not get used to it. By the second week I was counting the clacks. By the third I'd bought noise-cancelling earbuds, which helped, but I still shot little glances at Gary and his happy loud keyboard, thinking, does he have to enjoy it that much? So one day, as gently as I could, I mentioned the keyboard. I asked if he'd ever consider a quieter one, and Gary held up his hands. His knuckles were swollen, the joints thick and stiff. He has bad arthritis, he told me. On a normal flat laptop keyboard, the constant hard little presses hurt him. All day, 100 tiny aches. The mechanical keys, The big satisfying ones take almost no force. They spring back on their own. That loud clack I hated was the sound of the one keyboard that let him work without pain. I felt about 2 inches tall. Here I was, counting the clacks, and the clacks were the sound of a man just trying to get through the day without his hands hurting. So, was I overreacting about a keyboard? Yes, deeply. I kept the earbuds, and I never said another word about it except once, when his keyboard broke, I helped him find the exact same loud. Model overnight so he'd never have to type in pain. Clack away, Gary. That story ends there. One loud keyboard, one pair of aching hands, and a sound I learned to be glad of. I missed that clacking, honestly. It meant Gary was okay. Speaking of a coworker I completely misread, our next story is about the man who hoards office supplies like a squirrel before winter. There was a guy at my work, Marcus, and Marcus hoarded supplies. His desk drawers were full of pens, sticky notes, staples, whole packs of paper. If you needed something, you went to Marcus, but you also thought, why does one man have 40 pens? It looked greedy. It looked like the office supply closet had simply moved into his desk. The stockpile was legendary. The first time I opened his drawer, I actually laughed. There were so many pens. People made jokes about Marcus's bunker. Somebody once counted, half seriously, and got to something like 200 pens across his drawers. 200 for one man. It seemed absurd, maybe a little selfish. So one day I asked him, kindly, what the stockpile was about, and Marcus shrugged and told me the company was cheap. Genuinely, chronically cheap about supplies. Every couple of months the supply closet would run bone dry, and there'd be no pens, no paper, no sticky notes, sometimes for weeks, while some requests sat unapproved on a manager's desk, and people would quietly panic because you can't do your job with nothing. So Marcus, years ago, started stocking up whenever supplies came in, not for himself, for the droughts. So that when the closet ran dry, his drawer never did, and anybody could come take what they needed. He wasn't hoarding. He was running a tiny secret supply bank for the whole floor, funded entirely by his own foresight. So, was I overreacting, judging Marcus for his 40 pens? Yes, and I use one of those pens right now. When the closet runs dry, everyone still goes to Marcus, and Marcus always has enough. He plans for winter so nobody else has to. That story ends there. 200 pens, one cheap company, and a man quietly making sure the floor never runs out. Take a pen. Marcus has plenty. Speaking of a coworker who wouldn't stop looking out for us, our next story is about the man who nags everyone to use their vacation days. At my office there's a man named Ted, and Ted will not let you lose your time off. He knows everyone's PTO balance roughly, and as the year runs down he starts reminding people, you've got 8 days left. Book something, don't let it expire. For a while I found it a bit much. I'm a grown adult, I'd think. I know how many days I have. It was a whole campaign, every autumn. The first reminders were gentle. By November, they were pointed. He'd walk past your desk and just say a number, 6, and keep walking. People rolled their eyes. He's not my dad, someone would mutter. Why does Ted care so much whether I take a Tuesday off? So one slow afternoon I asked him, why the vacation crusade, Ted? And he got quiet for a moment. And he told me about a coworker he'd had years back, a good one who never took a day. Saved it all up, always meaning to use it later, always too busy. And that man worked himself into the ground, right up until his health gave out, with something like 40 unused vacation days on the books. 40 days he'd earned and never took, gone, worth nothing in the end. Ted watched it happen and couldn't unwatch it. So now he nags. Every autumn, every desk, a number and a warning. Not because he's nosy. Because he decided, standing in a hospital hallway once, that nobody on his floor would ever again save up their whole life for a later. That doesn't come. So, was I overreacting, finding Ted's reminders annoying? Yes, I took those 8 days. I went to the coast. And I thought about Ted the whole first morning, sitting in the sun, not at my desk. Take the days, he'd say. You earn them. He's right. That story ends there. One vacation crusade. One good man who saved it all for a later that never came. And a coworker making sure the rest of us actually live. Book the Tuesday. Ted's watching. Speaking of a small rule at work that hid a quiet grief, our next story is about the one chair in the office nobody was allowed to sit in. When I started at my job, someone told me on the first day, don't sit in the grey chair by the window. It wasn't broken. It wasn't reserved on any list. It was just understood, the whole floor knew it, that the grey chair stayed empty. For a while I thought it was some silly office superstition, the kind of thing that outlives its reason. The rule was absolute and unspoken. The first week I almost sat in it by accident, and 3 people said my name at once. After that I noticed it was always there, always empty, pulled up to an empty desk that nobody used either. I figured it was a quirk. A weird little office tradition. I even found it a bit much, honestly, guarding a chair. So one day I asked an older coworker, gently, what the deal was with the grey chair, and she went quiet. And she told me it had been Eddie's. Eddie had sat in that chair for 19 years. He was the heart of the floor, the one who remembered your kids' names and brought donuts on Fridays. And 2 winters ago he passed, suddenly, over a weekend. On the Monday, nobody could bring themselves to touch his chair. And somehow, without anyone deciding it, they just never did. They kept it there, by the window, in the good light. A quiet place where Eddie still was, a little. Nobody had the heart to make a rule of it. It just became one. New people were told gently on their first day, the way I was. Don't sit in the grey chair. And most of them, once they heard why, never wanted to. So, was I overreacting, thinking it was a silly superstition? I was wrong is all. It wasn't superstition. It was a whole floor of people grieving a good man in the only quiet way they had. The chair is still there. The light still finds it every afternoon. That story ends there. One empty grey chair. One man who sat in it for 19 years, and a floor that couldn't say goodbye, so they just kept his seat warm with sunlight. Leave the chair, they tell you, and you would. Speaking of a coworker whose fussy habit turned out to be self-defense, our next story is about the man who writes a paragraph for a one-line task. I worked with a man named Roy who over-explained everything. Ask Roy a simple question and you got an essay. Where are the files? Would come back as 3 paragraphs with headers, screenshots, and a numbered list. For the smallest task, Roy wrote instructions like he was defusing a bomb. For a while it drove me a little crazy. Just tell me the folder, Roy. It was thorough to the point of comedy. The first time he sent me a 12-step guide to using the office printer, I laughed. People forwarded Roy's emails around as a joke. Only Roy could make this take a page. I found it exhausting, honestly. I thought he was showing off, or just couldn't help himself. So one day I asked him, kindly, why the novels? Why not just a quick answer? And Roy told me that at a job before this one, he'd given someone a quick verbal answer. Just a fast, casual, yeah, do it this way. And that person did it that way, and it went wrong, expensively wrong. And when the dust settled, the story became that Roy had told them to do it wrong. His word against theirs, nothing written, no proof of what he'd actually said. It nearly cost him his job over a hallway conversation he couldn't take back. So now Roy writes it all down. Every step, every screenshot, just to be clear, not to show off. So that his help can never again be twisted into his fault. Every over-explained email is a man making sure the record protects him. So, were we overreacting, groaning at Roy's paragraphs? A little. And I'll say this, when something at that office actually broke, Roy's 12-step guide was the only reason we ever fixed it. Write the novel, Roy. We read it now. That story ends there. One printer guide with 12 steps, one fast answer that once went wrong, and a man who decided his help would always come with receipts. Roy's emails are long. They've never once failed me. Speaking of a coworker who made sure nobody got left out, our next story is about the woman who makes everyone sign every birthday card. At my office, there's a woman named Denise, and Denise runs the birthday cards. Every birthday, a card goes around, and Denise makes absolutely sure every single person signs it. She'll hunt you down. She'll bring the card to your desk and stand there. For a while, I thought it was a bit much. It's a card, I think. Not everyone needs to sign a card. She was relentless about it. The first time she cornered me, I was on a call, and she just set the card down and pointed until I signed. People teased her about it, the card sergeant. I figured she was just one of those people who takes office birthdays too seriously. So one day I asked her why the cards mattered so much, and Denise told me. A few years back, before she took the cards over, they'd been handled loosely. Whoever remembered, signed. And one year, a quiet new hire's birthday came around, and the card went out, and somehow it barely got signed. 3 names. The poor woman opened a nearly empty card in front of everyone, and tried to smile, and then went and cried in the stairwell where she thought no one could hear. Denise heard. So Denise took over the cards, and she swore that never again, not on her floor, would anyone open a card and count 3 names and feel like nobody knew they existed. That's why she hunts you down. That's why she stands there. Every full card is her making sure you know you're seen. So, was I overreacting, finding the card thing excessive? Yes. I sign the second she hands it to me now, and I write more than my name. Denise taught me that a signature is a small way of saying, I'm glad you're here, sign the card. That story ends there. One birthday sergeant, one nearly empty card and a woman crying in a stairwell, and a coworker who decided nobody would ever feel that. Small again, sign it. Denise is watching, and she's right to. Speaking of a coworker I was quietly unfair to, our next story is about the colleague I kept getting stuck walking behind in the hall. There was a woman at my office, Grace, who walked slowly, and our office had one long main hallway that everyone used. And I always, somehow, ended up behind Grace in that hallway, matching her slow pace, unable to politely get around, quietly impatient. Late to wherever I was going. For a while, God forgive me, it annoyed me. It was a small, petty thing that built up. The first few times I didn't think about it. Then I started to dread that hallway, started timing my trips to avoid getting stuck behind her. I never said anything, of course. I just did the silent, sighing, checking my watch dance of a person trapped behind a slow walker. I'm not proud of it. Then one day I noticed she was using a cane just slightly near her leg, and I asked a coworker and I felt the floor drop. Grace had had a major surgery on her hip that spring. She'd been told she might not walk unassisted again, and she'd fought her way back month by month to walking that long hallway on her own. Slowly, carefully, every slow step down that hall was a small victory she'd earned with a year of pain. And I'd been sighing behind her, checking my watch. I have never felt smaller. Here was a woman doing something genuinely remarkable, one careful step at a time, and I turned it into my minor inconvenience. So, was I overreacting, being annoyed at a slow walker? I was worse than overreacting. I was blind. Now, when I end up behind Grace, I slow down on purpose, and I match her pace, and if she wants to talk, we talk, and I get where I'm going. Exactly when I get there. It's the best walk of my day. That story ends there. One slow hallway, one hip that had to be relearned step by step, and a man who mistook a quiet act of courage for an inconvenience. Slow down, you'll get there. Speaking of a coworker whose blunt rule saved us all, our next story is about the man who makes every meeting short and standing. At my job, there's a man named Hassan, and Hassan killed the long meeting. When he took over our team, he made a rule. Meetings are 15 minutes, and you stand up for them. No sitting, no settling in, no slideshows with 40 slides. Stand up, say the thing, sit back down at your desk and work. At first, some people found it jarring, even a little rude. It was a hard change. The first standing meeting, people kept trying to sit, out of habit, and Hassan would just wait by the door. Some folks grumbled that it felt abrupt, that he was rushing them. I wondered, myself, if he just hated talking to us. It seemed almost harsh how fast he ended things. So one day I asked him where the standing rule came from, and Hassan laughed and told me. At a job years before, he'd sat in meetings, long ones. 2 hours, 3 hours, whole afternoons swallowed by people talking in circles about nothing, while the actual work piled up and everyone stayed late to finish it. He calculated once that he'd spent something like an entire month of working days, a full month, sitting in meetings that decided nothing. He decided he would never steal that from a team of his. So he made everyone stand, because a person standing up gets to the point. 15 minutes and you have your afternoon back. It wasn't rudeness. It was the kindest thing a manager ever did for my calendar. So, were we overreacting, thinking Hassan was harsh? Yes. I have hours of my life back because of that man. Our meetings end, we go do the work, and we go home on time. Stand up, say the thing, sit down. Best rule in the building. That story ends there. One standing rule, 1 month of life lost to meetings that decided nothing, and a manager who gave his whole team their afternoons back. 15 minutes. On your feet. Thank you, Hassan. Speaking of a coworker who wouldn't let anyone eat alone, our next story is about the woman who drags the whole office to lunch. At my office, there's a woman named Bia, and Bia will not let you eat lunch alone. Every day, around noon, she does a lap. She stops at every desk. We're going, come on, even the quiet ones, the headphones on ones, the new person who hasn't spoken to anyone yet. Bia gets them all. For a while, I thought she was just relentlessly social, the type who can't stand a quiet room. She was impossible to say no to. The first week, I tried to work through lunch, and Bea simply stood at my desk until I gave up and came. People half joked that Bea took attendance. I figured she just liked a big loud table and didn't much think about the ones who'd rather be left alone. So one day I asked her why she does the lunch lap every single day without fail. And Bea told me about her first job decades ago. She'd been painfully shy, new, and nobody had ever asked her to come along. For months, she ate lunch alone in her car in the parking lot, so nobody would see that she had no one to sit with. Months of it. She said she could still feel exactly how that parking lot felt at noon. And she promised herself that if she ever had the chance, no one around her would ever eat alone in a car, wondering what was wrong with them. So every day she does the lap. She gets the quiet ones, the new ones, the headphones ones, not because she needs a crowd, because she remembers the car. So, was I overreacting, finding Bea a bit much? Yes, that bit much is the warmest thing in the building. Now I do the lap with her sometimes. We get the new person especially. Nobody eats in the car on Bea's watch. That story ends there. One daily lunch lap, one shy girl who ate alone in a parking lot, and a woman who made sure no one around her ever would again. Come on. We're going. You're sitting with us. Speaking of a coworker whose odd habit had a tender reason, our next story is about the man who sends work emails at 2 a.m. There was a man on my team named Paul who emailed at strange hours. You'd wake up to 3 messages from Paul, timestamped 2:15, 3 a.m, the dead middle of the night. And they always started the same way, with a little apology. Sorry for the hour. For a while I worried he was working himself to death, or worse, that he expected the rest of us to be up too. It was a pattern you couldn't miss. The first few times I figured he'd just had a bad night. But it kept up, week after week, these quiet apologetic emails landing in the dark. Some people wondered if Paul was a workaholic who couldn't switch off. A couple grumbled that seeing a 3 a.m. email made them feel like they should be working too. So one day I gently asked Paul if he was okay working those hours, and he told me. His mother was very ill at home, and Paul was her caregiver through the night. He'd sleep in pieces, up every couple of hours to help her, to check on her, to sit with her when she was frightened. And in those small hours, while she rested, sitting in the dark by her bed, he'd quietly do a little work on his phone. Not because anyone asked, because it was the one thing in his life he could still control, and it kept his hands busy through the longest nights of his life. The apologies weren't him expecting anything from us. They were a tired man saying sorry for a life that had gone sideways in the only way he knew how. So, was I overreacting, reading anything into those emails? Yes, and I'm glad I asked instead of assumed. We told him to stop apologizing and to send whatever, whenever, and that none of us expected a thing at 3 a.m. His mother passed that winter. The late emails stopped. I'd give a lot to see one again. That story ends there. One inbox full of 3 a.m. apologies, one son caring for his mother through the dark, and a little work done by a bedside to keep the nights from swallowing him. Never apologize for the hour, Paul. Speaking of a coworker who guarded a small kingdom, our next story is about the woman who is the only one allowed to fix the printer. Every office has one, and at mine it was Andrea. Andrea fixed the printer. When it jammed or flashed some cryptic error or ate a document, you went and got Andrea, and Andrea fixed it always with a few taps and a certain look. But she was also territorial about it. If you tried to fix it yourself, she'd appear, almost hurt, and take over. For a while I found that a little odd. It's a printer, I think. Let me try. It was her domain, and everyone knew it. The first time I tried to clear a jam myself, Andrea materialized like I'd set off an alarm. People joked that the printer was Andrea's baby. I wondered why anyone would want to own the single most frustrating machine in the building. So one day, waiting on a print job, I asked her about it, and Andrea, a little shy, told me. She'd worked at that company for a very long time. Long enough that a lot of what she used to do had been automated away or handed to younger hires or software. And slowly, over the years, she'd started to feel invisible, like the building would run exactly the same as she weren't in it. Except for the printer. The printer, she understood. The printer needed her. When it broke, people came looking for her and were glad to see her and thanked her. It was, she said quietly, the part of the day where she still mattered. So she guarded it, not out of ego, because that stubborn machine was the thing that made her feel needed, in a place that had slowly stopped needing her. So, was I overreacting, thinking she was territorial for no reason? Yes, and I never fixed that printer again. When it jams, I go get Andrea every time, and I thank her like she's worked a miracle, because to her, a little she has. The printer is yours, Andrea. That story ends there. One jammed printer, one long-serving woman who'd started to feel invisible, and the one machine that still called her by name. Go get Andrea, she'll fix it, she always does. Speaking of a coworker who quietly took care of everyone, our next story is about the woman with the snack drawer. At my job there's a woman named Lupe, and Lupe has a snack drawer, not for herself mostly. It's the bottom drawer of her desk, and it's full, always, of granola bars and crackers and little bags of chips. And if you're hungry, Lupe knows before you say anything. She'll just quietly slide a granola bar onto your desk and keep walking. For a while I thought she was just generous, the office mom type. It was steady and it was quiet. She never made a thing of it. The first time she left a snack on my desk, on a day I'd skipped breakfast, I hadn't even told her I was hungry. She just seemed to know. People joked warmly about Lupe's drawer, the office pantry. I figured she just liked feeding people. So one day I thanked her properly and asked why she keeps it stocked, and Lupe told me. There'd been a year, early on, when money was very thin for her. A stretch where she came to work with no lunch and no money for lunch, and just drank water and hoped nobody noticed her stomach. She said the worst part wasn't the hunger, it was the shame of it, the hoping no one could tell, nobody ever offered, because nobody knew. And she promised herself that if she was ever okay again, she'd make sure no one around her ever sat hungry and ashamed and silent the way she had. So she keeps the drawer full, and she watches quietly for the person who skipped a meal and she feeds them without ever making them ask. Because she remembers exactly how hard it is to ask. So, was I overreacting, thinking it was just generosity? It was so much more than that. It was a woman turning her hardest year into a full drawer nobody has to be ashamed to open. I keep mine stocked now too. Lupe taught me how. That story ends there. One full desk drawer, one hungry year nobody knew about, and a woman making sure the next hungry person never has to ask. The drawer's open. Take what you need. Speaking of a coworker whose careful habit protected the next person, our next story is about the man who leaves painstaking notes for the next shift. I worked a job with shifts, and the man before me was named Cole, and Cole left notes, long ones. At the end of every shift, a full page for whoever came next. What happened, what to watch, what was half done, where he'd left things. For a while I thought it was overkill. Just tell me the big stuff, Cole. I don't need a diary. The notes were almost absurdly thorough. The first few I skimmed. Then I started actually reading them and realized they'd saved me from walking into problems I'd never have seen coming. Still, some of the other shift workers grumbled that Cole's notes took him 10 minutes to write and them 10 minutes to read. Why so careful over a shift change? So one day I asked him, and Cole told me years back on a different job, a shift change went wrong. Someone handed off badly, left out one important thing, just forgot to mention it. And the person who came in next didn't know and made a reasonable choice based on what they'd been told, and it went badly, and somebody got hurt. Not killed, but hurt. And it wasn't really anyone's fault, and it was everyone's fault, and it all came down to a handoff where one thing didn't get said. Cole was there. He never forgot it. So now he writes it all down. Every shift. Everything the next person could possibly need, so that no one ever again walks into a mess blind because he couldn't be bothered to write one more line. So, were we overreacting, groaning about Cole's long notes? Yes, those notes were the safest thing in the building. I write them like that now for whoever comes after me. Cole taught me a handoff is a kind of promise. Read the note. That story ends there. One page of careful handoff notes, one shift change that once went wrong, and a man making sure the next person never walks in blind. Read the whole note. Cole did for you. Speaking of a coworker whose strictness came from a scar, our next story is about the man who is always exactly 2 minutes early. There was a man at my job named Frank, and Frank was never late, not once. He was, in fact, always exactly a couple of minutes early, at his desk, logged on, ready, before the clock even started. And he noticed when others weren't. A little glance at the latecomer, a little tap of his watch. For a while I found it insufferable. We're 2 minutes late, Frank. Relax. He was rigid about it, and it grated. The first time he tapped his watch at me, I wanted to say something rude. People called him the time cop behind his back. I figured he was just one of those stiff, rule-loving people who enjoyed feeling superior about punctuality. So one day, curious more than annoyed, I asked Frank why the clock mattered so much to him, and Frank got quiet and told me. At a job years before, a job he loved and needed with a family to feed, he'd been let go. And the reason written down, the official reason, was lateness. 90 seconds, a handful of times, clocking in a minute and a half past the hour because of a bus that ran late. That was all it took. They'd wanted to cut someone, and his 90 seconds gave them the paperwork to do it. He lost a job he needed over a minute and a half. So now Frank is never late, not by a second. Because he learned, the hard way, that for people like him, being on time isn't about the clock. It's about never handing anyone a reason. The watch tapping was him, in his gruff way, trying to protect the rest of us from what happened to him. So, was I overreacting about the time cop? Yes, and I stopped rolling my eyes the day I heard why. I'm early now too. Frank and I nodded each other across the quiet office, 2 minutes before the hour. Better early, he'd say. I know now what he means. That story ends there. One watch-tapping time cop, one good man fired over 90 seconds, and a habit that was really a scar. Be early. Frank's saving you a seat and a reason. Speaking of a coworker who guarded the quiet, our next story is about the woman who shushes the whole floor. At my office, there was a woman named Nadia who policed the noise. If the floor got loud, laughter, a rowdy phone call, a group gathering at someone's desk, Nadia would appear with a finger to her lips. Shh, keep it down. For a while it felt schoolmarmish, honestly. It's an office, I'd think, not a library. A little life won't kill anyone. She was firm about it, and it rubbed people the wrong way. The first time she shushed a group I was in, I felt weirdly scolded. People muttered that Nadia needed to lighten up, that she was the fun police. I figured she was just someone who couldn't stand a bit of noise. So one day I asked her, as kindly as I could, why the quiet mattered so much to her, and Nadia told me. There was a co-worker of ours, a man 2 desks over, who got severe migraines, the kind that put him in the dark for a day. And loud noise, sudden bursts of it, could tip a bad morning into a lost one. He would never ask the floor to be quiet. He was far too proud, and he'd just suffer through it, grey-faced, saying nothing. Nadia had noticed. She'd watched him wince at the loud days and quietly go home sick. So she appointed herself, without telling him, the keeper of the quiet. Every shush was her protecting a man who'd never once asked to be protected. So, was I overreacting, thinking Nadia was the fun police? Completely. She wasn't guarding a rule, she was guarding a person. Now, on the loud days, I catch her eye and I help her settle the floor, keep it down. Someone 2 desks over will thank you, even if he never knows to. That story ends there. One shushing fun police, one proud man fighting migraines in silence, and a woman guarding a quiet he never asked for. Keep it down. It matters more than you know. Speaking of a co-worker who wouldn't stop teaching, our next story is about the old hand who overtrains every new person who arrives. At my job, there's a man named Walt, the most senior person on the floor, and Walt overtrains everyone. A new hire shows up, and Walt takes them under his wing so completely it's almost too much. He teaches them everything, twice. Every system, every shortcut, every little trick he's learned in 30 years. He won't let a new person struggle with anything he could have taught them. For a while, I thought he just liked the sound of his own voice. It was relentless generosity. The first week, a new hire would look almost overwhelmed by how much Walt wanted to give them. People gently teased him. Walt's adopted another one. I figured he was just a natural teacher who couldn't turn it off. So one day I asked him why he pours so much into every new person, and Walt smiled and told me he was going to retire soon. Within the year, And the thing that kept him up at night wasn't the golf he'd play or the time he'd have. It was the floor, his floor. He'd spent 30 years learning how to keep it running, all these little things that lived only in his head, and one day soon he'd walk out the door and take all of it with him. Unless he gave it away, all of it, to everyone, as fast and as thoroughly as he could. So that when he left, the place he loved wouldn't miss a step, so that the people he cared about would have everything he knew. He wasn't overtraining. He was leaving them a whole life's worth of knowing, one new hire at a time, before the door closed behind him. So, were we overreacting, teasing Walt for adopting the new kids? Yes, that man is trying to leave us better than he found us. I take every scrap he offers now, and I write it down, and I'll teach it to whoever comes after me. Teach me, Walt. I'm listening. That story ends there. One old hand overtraining everyone in sight. One retirement coming fast, and a man giving away 30 years so the floor he loves never misses a step. Teach the new kid, Walt. We'll pass it on. Speaking of a small thing at work that carried a whole grief, our next story is about the half-dead plant on the windowsill. That one. Coworker will not let die. By the window at my office, there's a sad little plant. Honestly, it's mostly brown. And there's a woman named June who tends it like it's the most precious thing in the building. She waters it just so, turns it toward the light, talks to it a little when she thinks no one's near. For a while I thought it was sweet but a bit silly. It's a dying plant, I think. Let it go, June. She was devoted to it past all reason. The first time I saw her carefully wipe the dust off its few sad leaves, I almost said something. People smiled about June and her plant. I figured she was just one of those people who can't bear to throw anything living away. So one day, I asked her about the plant, gently, and June went quiet and told me it had been Rosa's. Rosa sat by that window for years, and she kept that plant green and full and beautiful, her pride right there in the good light. And Rosa had passed the winter before quite suddenly. And in the weeks after, with everyone too sad to know what to do, the plant started to die, the way a plant does when the person who loved. It is gone, and June couldn't stand it. She couldn't bring Rosa back, but she could keep Rosa's plant alive, so she took it over. Every leaf she saves is a way of saying Rosa was here, Rosa mattered, we haven't forgotten. So, was I overreacting, thinking it was silly? I was wrong is all. It was never about the plant. It was a woman refusing to let the last green thing her friend loved die on her watch. It's putting out new leaves now, that plant. Slowly. Oh, June's winning. That story ends there. One half-dead plant by a window. One woman named Rosa who loved it, and a friend keeping it alive because she can't do anything else for. Her now. Water it, June. It's coming back. Speaking of a coworker whose secret I completely imagined wrong, our next story is about the one desk drawer that stays locked. At my job there's a man named Hank, and Hank keeps one drawer of his desk locked, the bottom left, always locked, always has been. And of course, a locked drawer at work sets the imagination running. For a while I made up stories about what was in it. Something he was hiding, something he shouldn't have. A locked drawer just looks like a secret and not a nice one. The mystery grew in my head. The first time I noticed him lock it, I thought nothing of it. But then I noticed he always locked it, carefully, even to walk to the printer. People wondered, idly, in that gossipy office way, what Hank kept in there. Nobody knew. I'll admit I imagined the worst, the way you do. So one day, when we were the last two there, I finally just asked him, half joking, "What's in the mystery drawer, Hank?" And he laughed, and to my surprise, he unlocked it and showed me. It was full of cards, notes, little scraps of paper. Every thank you card, every kind note, every "you saved me on that project" sticky that anyone had ever given him in 22 years at that company. A whole drawer of them. Decades of small kindnesses kept. He told me, a little embarrassed, that on the hard days, the days he felt useless or invisible or ready to quit, he'd unlock that drawer and read a few, proof in other people's handwriting that he'd mattered to someone, that the work had meant something. He locked it because it was, he said, the most valuable thing he owned. So, was I overreacting, imagining a dark secret? Yes, and I've never felt sweeter about being wrong. It wasn't a secret. It was a lifetime of being appreciated, kept under lock and key because it was precious. I wrote Hank a card the next week. I hope it's in the drawer. That story ends there. One locked drawer, 22 years of thank you notes, and a man who kept proof that he mattered where he could always find it. Write someone a card. It might end up somewhere safe. Speaking of a coworker who quietly carried a weight for everyone, our next story is about the man who is always the last one out. At my old job, there was a man named Sal who was always the last to leave. Every night, no matter how late, Sal did a final lap. Check the coffee machine was off. Check the space heaters. Check the doors, the windows, the lights. Only then would he go. For a while, I thought he was just anxious or didn't have anywhere better to be. Go home, Sal, I'd think. It's fine. It was a nightly ritual, and it was thorough. The first time I stayed late and watched him do the whole circuit, I was almost impatient for him. People assumed Sal was just a worrier or lonely, doing laps of an empty office instead of going home. So one night I walked the lap with him and asked why he does it, and Sal told me. Years back, at another place, someone had left something on overnight, a small heater, an honest mistake, and there'd been a fire. Nobody was hurt, thank God. It was caught in time. But it had been close, terribly close, and Sal had lain awake for weeks after thinking about how close. About the cleaners who'd have come in, the early crew, the what-ifs. So at this job, he quietly appointed himself the last one out. Every night. Not because he was told to. Because he decided that on his watch, nobody would ever come to work and find the worst that happened while they slept. He wasn't lonely or anxious. He was standing guard every night over a building full of people who'd already gone home and would never know his name was the reason. They came back to it safe. So, was I overreacting, thinking Sal should just go home? Yes. That last lap was a gift the whole office got and never saw. I stay and walk it with him sometimes now. Two of us checking the heaters, turning off the lights. Go home safe. Sal's got it. That story ends there. One last lap every night, one fire years ago that came too close, and a man guarding a building full of people who'd already gone home. Lights off, doors locked, sleep easy, Sal checked. Speaking of the quiet kindnesses we only understand too late, our last story tonight is about the oldest man in the office and the countdown to his retirement. For my last story, I want to tell you about Mr. Okafor. He was the oldest man at my company, there longer than anyone. and for his final year he had a little countdown taped to his monitor. Days until retirement. It ticked down all year, and we'd tease him about it warmly. "Big plans, Mr. Okafor?" And he'd just smile. Here's the thing I only understood at the very end. Every single morning, for all the years anyone could remember, Mr. Okafor got in first. Before everyone. And every morning he made the coffee and he turned on the lights and he adjusted the heat so the floor was warm by the time people arrived, and he wiped down the break room table quietly every day. We all just thought the office was that way, warm and lit and ready. We never once thought about why. It was just how the mornings were. On his last day, Mr. Okafor retired and went home. And the next morning we all walked into a floor that was cold and dark, and the coffee wasn't made, and the break room table was sticky. And it hit us all at once what he had been doing every morning for 30 years, quietly making the place warm for the rest of us before we even arrived, and never saying a word, and never being thanked because we never even knew. So, were we overreacting, teasing him about his countdown? No, we just never saw the gift until it stopped. We take turns now, coming in early, making the coffee, warming the floor. We call it the Okafor shift. It's the least we can do for a man who did it unthanked for 30 years. That story ends there. One retirement countdown, one cold, dark morning that taught us everything, and a man who warmed a floor full of people for 30 years, and never asked us to notice. We notice now, Mr. Okafor. We've got the lights. That's all for tonight. 23 small stories, and every one of them turned out the same way, didn't it? Somebody at work, quietly looking out for somebody else, in a way that looked strange or annoying until you knew the reason underneath. Maybe that's the real answer to, are you overreacting? Look a little closer at the people you work beside. Usually, there's a reason. Usually, it's kinder than it looked. Thank you for spending your night here with me. Sleep well, be gentle with the people you work with, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.